So welcome. This is a Mural mini webinar series, three-part series, and we're really hoping that this helps people who, for one reason or another, suddenly find themselves needing to work remotely and have some questions about how to do that. Our first session really talked about the tools and the capabilities that you need, and in this webinar, we're going to expand on that and really talk about the mindset that you need to have, in addition to those tools, the mindset you need to have successful team trust in your remote team. My name is Mark Tippin. I'm the head of services, and joining me today is Haley Temple. And
hey, everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
Great.
All right. So in today's call, feel free to use the chat and the Q&A, and we'll go ahead and get started here.
All right. So thanks for joining us from wherever you are in the world. And I want to make sure that you guys make the most out of your time here with us. So wherever you're joining us from today, let's take a deep collective breath. Ready? Inhale and exhale.
I think that's the first time today I've done that.
Yeah,
It's like you just forget to breathe.
It's important to realize that, right? Like, we're not alone. All of us are in this together. Mark, you and I are remote teammates, and it's nice to take that moment together. Just be mindful of where we are. As Mark mentioned, make sure that you get your questions answered. We realized you probably have lots of them coming into our time together. So use the Q&A panel in Zoom, which we can highlight for you. And also, I see some great stuff already going on in the chat, so you can also add it there. Again, if you have any resources, thoughts, ideas, feelings you want to share, please feel free to do that as well in the chat. And we're excited to have you kind of exchanging stuff together there.
Wonderful. So what's this series all about? The motivation behind this is we have friends and colleagues that have been impacted, and then we have lots of friends and customers that, for a number of reasons, are looking to reduce carbon footprint or just looking to explore new ways of working. So no matter what your trajectory is that lands you here with us today, we really want these to be three very short 30-minute focus sessions with the information we hope is useful to you. Want to make it easy to share, so the replays of these videos are going to be made available. So it's easy if you find value in them and you're trying to get a team onboarded with some of these thoughts and procedures. We want the format to be short, easy to share, and just really focus on the essential information that you'll need.
And here's what you'll get from this series. So if it's your first one of the three series, welcome. We'll make sure that after this session, you get a video recording, an edited recording of this 30-minute session that you can share. You'll also get a link to the canvas that we're presenting here, because it's actually a very interactive guide, which you'll find out about in a little bit. Hopefully, we also answer or start to open up some of the questions you might have about remote work and remote collaboration. And we realized that and hope that maybe Mural would be part of your remote tool set for working with teams. And we want to make sure that you have the option to make remote work possible. So we invite you to use Mural for free for 90 days when it's usually 30. So let's jump in and get started, and we'll talk more about how to get that 90 days for free in a little bit.
All right, sounds good. So if you remember from our oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No,
let's talk a little bit about,
I know, we're like on here. So yeah. So we have a lot of our teammates or our customers, as Mark mentioned, who are starting to work remote all of a sudden, whether they've chosen that or they haven't. And it's pretty frustrating if you're new to this space. I started working remote 2 years ago, and I felt a lot of these frustrations. For example, you're in a call, and you're trying to have a conversation, and you keep going in and out, whether it's poor internet connection or someone's phone isn't working. There's also maybe you're working with somebody on the other side of the world and you don't have that cadence of work. So everything you might have done the day before is now a waste because the team's pivoted without letting you know. Always a fun time. Another challenge that I've personally experienced a lot is missing that connectivity. I think we miss that community in that sense we get from passing people in the hallways or just going to lunch together. So that's a very real challenge that a lot of people face when they're doing remote work. And then there's a lack of boundaries, whether that's explicit, your manager or someone's expecting you to be online all the time, or my personal challenge is I log off, but you can see I'm working in my apartment. So it's really hard for me to click, put things away, turn things off, and not think about work. And what we want to do today is help you guys address some of these frustrations and adopt a mindset that makes you and your team successful.
Yeah, it's so funny. You just reminded me. Oh yeah, I need to mute notifications on my mobile devices in front of me so it doesn't interrupt what I'm doing. And they do that around the clock, right? And these tools, as we talked about yesterday, these are capabilities that we need to explore, and have that team discussion. Hopefully, if you joined us yesterday, if you haven't, go back and take a look at that video or the worksheet that we have. It's really important that the team align around those tools, but the tools alone are not enough for a healthy team culture, right? So we need to move beyond just the fact that we have these tools and start talking about how we come together as a team and how we build that healthy remote team culture. So the way we're structuring this discussion today is we're going to really focus on the immediate needs, right? So there are things that you need to get going with these tools to become productive as a team, right? And those are kind of more the tactical things to get started. But once you've got that initial connection down and you're starting to roll, we want to start transitioning into what it takes to build a resilient culture around teamwork. And just because you don't have the ability to be in the same physical space, there's no reason why you can't build and grow and nurture a really healthy, collaborative, positive team culture remotely. Um, and the one aspect of that is the team, but then we'll also take a look at from the perspective of the individual. Because really a team is made up of individuals, so it's not only what the team says are the norms and how we kind of set up that structure collectively, but then our individual responsibility that really contributes to building that trust and that psychological safety that remote teams need. Every team needs, but remote teams especially need in order to thrive.
All right. So let's talk first about the immediate needs. Your team is suddenly remote. How the heck are you supposed to keep things productive and keep your team in action? So, we're going to focus on three essentials today. First, test your tools. Second, define your rules. And third, create roles. Let me jump first into testing your tools. Oh, apologies. Mark, you're going to jump into talking.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I do have an affinity for. I'm called Inspector Gadget because of
Yes,
you know I always travel with every little gadget and gadget.
you
So
did.
the now that we have them, testing them is really important. So if you've had that discussion, you've aligned them testing it. Why is testing important? Because one, it's going to level the playing field. And this is especially depending on the team shape, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But if you're maybe co-located and you're trying to work with some remote people, it's important that that you level the playing ground, right? So the playing field, so that everyone understands how they work. Everyone is kind of using an individual device with a web camera, so it's not just a laptop sitting in the conference room pointed at some wall, and then all the remote people are effectively shut out from being seen or being able to experience what's going on. So really testing the tools, making sure they all work and that everyone has equal access to them. Making the meetings efficient is also really important. Right. The first 10 minutes of every meeting I had in previous enterprise gigs was trying to troubleshoot the echo or the feedback or the video projector or the polycom in the table, right? So part of testing is just making sure that all of that wasted time that's at the front of almost every meeting, eliminate that. Everyone knows how it works, and you get that time back, and recovering, right? So we know with making the meetings efficient and working those kinks out on how it should work, even with knowing how to use the tool, sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes a Wi-Fi drops. Sometimes things happen, and so practicing this and working with the tools gives you a sense of, well, what do we do suddenly if we lose a connection to the video conference? What's our backup plan? So testing it and not trying to get work done, but really trying to do the work of understanding the tools and building up facility with them is important. So how do we go about doing this? We've already talked about you need to agree. First of all, if you're not all trying to use the same tools, or the tools that you use change from meeting to meeting, that's not going to work for you. I would recommend that the first tool that you focus on is the one around asynchronous communication. And why do I say this? A perfect example is recently, within the last 2 days, we've had two situations where, for one reason or another, the video conference that we were in ended. Either the host left accidentally, or someone needed to hop to another meeting and it ended. What did we do? We fell back into Slack, which is the tool we use for asynchronous communication. Right. So even though we lost this real-time communication channel, we all knew exactly where to go, and someone eventually popped a new link in, and we're back and connected and running. Right. So that asynchronous channel is usually the fundamental tool that's going to make everything else possible. Beyond that, just make sure that you're sending invitations to everyone and that you're testing the access. And I really do recommend setting up a dedicated 30 minutes at least to run through test connecting, test microphones, make sure everyone can hear and be heard, and that all the tools are working, that you have access to your shared drives. How many times have I been invited to something and I don't really actually try and access it until 3 in the morning when I'm the only one awake and I really need it for this 6 a.m. meeting, and I can't get in and I didn't test it until. So testing all this stuff out in advance is really important.
Hmm. Yeah, somebody might say that they have the connection or they have access, but yeah, you don't know until they
You,
try it. So.
you don't know until you're actually in there and
You're
can copy
like,
something or put something in.
yeah. So even
Exactly.
doing a fun warm-up activity or something is a great 30-minute activity that you can really test drive that tech.
Yeah, that's a great point. It doesn't have to be a dull meeting at all. In fact, it could be a great team building meeting,
Mhm.
and rife with humor.
Yeah, disguised as a tech check.
That's right. Yeah, so these questions, we're not going to go into them. This is we're going to share this template with you afterwards, and so this is to help you kind of have these guided discussions with your teams. And in the mural, we have these little check marks. So if you want to keep track of stuff and what the discussions you've had, it's just a reminder for how you can drill into this in a little more detail with your teams.
Awesome. All right, next we talk about defining rules. So I think about rules as kind of a social contract or kind of an etiquette list that you and your team work through to define like what is okay or acceptable for working as a team, and then what's not okay. It's just as important to state as a team what isn't acceptable. And the reason that we define rules and guides for our team is that it really harmonizes your team. If everybody knows how they're supposed to act, when they're supposed to be online and where, it gives people peace of mind. They're not searching for different pieces of information in different places. It also establishes boundaries. We, first and foremost, are human beings. So we can't work 24 hours a day. I mentioned I think I might try and work 24 hours a day, and it's not possible. So I think we need to respect that and respect our teammates. Also recognize that we're experimenting in this remote world and mistakes are going to happen. So if you are clear about how we recover and when we can take time as people to recover, everybody will work a lot better together. And then it's also important to reinforce norms. So I mentioned what's acceptable or okay for when you're working together or on a client or customer call, and what's not okay. And that can be anything from the tools and capabilities to environment to attire. It can be anything that's really going to set your team up for feeling confident and successful when you're working together. So this is how we recommend you do that. First, recognize that there are different time zones you might be working in and celebrate that. That's pretty cool that you get to work with a really diverse team. And if you're on the same time zone, it's just as important to do that and recognize what is our schedule. You can see here, is it 9 to 5? Is it 7 to 8? Whatever it is, you as a team say, this is our working hours, and this is when we're going to be online, and this is when it's okay to log off. Next, as mentioned, you agree on when that working schedule is, and especially if you're working with a distributed team in different locations, make sure you're clear about when the overlaps are in your workday, because then you can prioritize doing real-time meetings during that overlap.
I
Finally,
also I
yeah,
just wanted to mention sometimes I found from highly distributed teams, they often take turns too,
mhm,
right? So in the example here, you might have three teams that overlap somewhat, but then you've got this outlier, and that's always miserable if that team always has to join at 10 at night or 4 in the morning, right?
mhm,
So the notion is that at least every once in a while you make it so that that everyone experiences a little bit of discomfort and that some people get a little relief, and even better if you can take into account certain regional holidays that one part of the world might be experiencing that you're not. It's just kind of this awareness about time in general and scheduling, and it's an opportunity to build empathy, but it's fair, and it acknowledges that we're all one team as opposed to we're headquarters and you guys just deal with it.
right, definitely. And then it's also really important with that in mind to decide when and where you're going to meet in real time, but also how you'll do asynchronous work. So, if, let's say, for example, the team in Hyderabad needs to connect with a team in San Francisco, how what's the expectation in terms of response? Does somebody send a message in Slack, for example, and they need to respond within 6 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours? Or, sometimes you might have to, as Mark mentioned, like share the pain a little bit in certain cases and say, on certain days we're going to respond or shift our hours to accommodate. But it's so important just for everybody's sanity and peace of mind that you make that clear so that people don't feel like they have to log back on after hours if that's really not the expectation. And again, we want to make sure that you guys go through some questions, take some time to think about these with your team. So you'll get this canvas, you can have this discussion with your group and start defining what a team charter or a social contract or those rules look like.
Cool. So if you have the rules kind of discussion going, the other one is talking about roles, and and roles can mean a lot of different things. There's maybe the title you have on your job description, but there's also kind of a social role you play within a team, and there's the individual that you are. So why do we actually make a point of acknowledging, creating, or embracing roles? Is one, they have a practical element in that they can maintain momentum, right? So if you're running a meeting, it's very helpful if you have someone who manages a parking lot, where ideas can get captured. Someone else is taking notes and making a list of action items. Someone else is a timekeeper, right? So it gives people a job to do, and it distributes the responsibility for successful collaboration. So it's going to keep momentum up. But also in assigning these roles, it builds community, right? And sometimes having the role of someone who does, like at Mural, we have a Friday fun fact, right? So there's someone inside the company from our people operations that will make sure that every Friday this thing happens like clockwork, and it's a really delightful ritual that gives you an opportunity to learn interesting things about your team, but it also it builds that sense of community, that we belong, that we're part of a company, and this is what we do as a company, and this is what we celebrate. Um, but also the roles can provide purpose, and one of the things that maybe we haven't really overtly acknowledged is that suddenly going remote, or people that maybe take a job that is a remote job, may suddenly find themselves feeling very isolated and dealing with issues of loneliness, and so especially if you're not very outgoing and able to always generate this outward engagement, having a role is almost like permission for you to be doing something and requesting things of other people, and an invitation to participate. And it really helps ground you in having a purpose and things that your team relies on you to do and appreciates that you do for them. So it's interesting. There's multi layers. There's very practical stuff, but then there's also things that connect more deeply with us as humans. Trying to make a difference. So, how do you go about this? I might suggest mapping it out together. There are all sorts of stakeholder exercises that can be adapted to really look at what are the things that what are the jobs to be done for this team. What are the things that the services that we provide internally or externally, and kind of map out the roles that are needed and understand where you may have gaps, and that's where the individual gets to advocate and maybe say, well, that's something I'm very good at. Right? You don't want to put me in charge of anything that needs organization or time management because I am that's not my strength. Right? But having that discussion. Right? So once you map it out, really discussing amongst yourselves how you will fill those roles, and then it's really up to the individual to embrace, not only to embrace, but then to question and evolve these roles over time, right? Something that you might need in a very small startup company might no longer be true once you reach a certain size, or even as a team that's just coming together for the first time, getting to know each other, might do certain types of, or have certain types of roles that help at that initial storming and norming phase. But when you're at the performing phase, maybe that role can be freed up and someone can be doing something else for the team.
Awesome. So these kind of cover the 3 points we mentioned. So if you test your tools, you define your rules, and you create roles, you can address some of those immediate needs to keep your team in action and productive. So now we kind of want to switch gears. That focuses on your immediate needs. And once you've hopefully settled down from this really chaotic period, your team is trying to figure out how do we work remote when we haven't been remote. We want to think about building long-term resilience. We mentioned having a plan that if and when something happens or people can't be in the office together, whether it's travel or illness or anything, you know what to do. So, Mark, I apologize.
Oh no, that's okay. That's okay.
um,
It's all fluid. Yeah,
yeah,
good. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, go
So
ahead.
we're going to talk about, to relate, get a touch on these two pieces here. So knowing your team shape and building a positive meeting cycle. And we'll dive into these more tomorrow, but we're going to touch on them today. And as when you get this canvas, you're going to get an awesome list of questions to think about and reflect on with your team.
You
So
bet. What actually? Do you mind if I? Because we did some research on this for the book,
yeah,
and and
please
and
do.
and I knew you were going to talk about this, but I think it's really useful for people to understand that there are four fundamental team shapes, and the fact that teams have shape has some implications about how you work together. So the first two, co-located is one that we're probably very familiar with. That was very predominant in the last century. Everyone goes into one specific geographic location, and that's where work happens. Larger companies might have experienced a split company, right? So maybe you have a Paris office and a UK office and a Hong Kong office, right? So you have these large aggregated people that are then trying to somehow collaborate more loosely between large um, locations. We're really going to focus more on these next two because they represent probably what where many people are that suddenly find themselves remote. And the two shapes are mixed and all remote. Mixed is where you still have a large, like headquarters, or a large aggregation of co-located people, and then you might have these new people that are somehow remote. So this could also be with companies located in one part of the world that now have remote employees that maybe are, isolated or through travel bans might need to be working from wherever they are. Remote is, maybe you're all in the same boat and everyone's just remote, and that could be by design. That's more common these days. But the overwhelming majority, as far as these four team shapes, mixed is by large the most common. Um, So the things that we'll note, we're not going to go through all the questions here, but if you're in a mixed situation, the thing that's really important is just to realize that if you're co-located, you have a tendency to have a large center of gravity there, and it's very easy to treat the remote folks as second-class citizens, or somehow, maybe not intentionally, but they get left out. So that's one of the reasons why, when you look at the tools that you're using and adopt them, that leveling the playing field is everyone joins through, through Zoom and Mural or whatever the combination of tools is, and everyone's having the same experience. Therefore, the empathy is immediate. Everyone's having the same experience. With 100% remote teams, it's just that center of gravity may not be there, but you also need to find balance between personalities. Some people have loud voices, some people are shy and more quiet, but you want to adopt behaviors. This is this larger team health picture that bring people and include them in the conversation to avoid that feeling of isolation and loneliness.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
You bet. Oh, and I guess the punchline here is summing all this together. Um, you know the things we're looking at here are the tools, the mindsets, and then the activities that we do together. And if you look at a typical meeting cycle, 75% of meetings are set up and they don't even have an agenda, right? So that's the first failure there. But that failure alone just kind of creates a cycle that leads to other undesirable behaviors and outcomes. So if you don't even have a purpose to begin with, you don't have an agenda, then poor behavior starts to dominate. And this can be unintentional. If no one's driving the bus, then someone who's outgoing might try and steer, try and make the team productive, and that may come across as someone who's just overbearing or dominating. But because there is no clear purpose, and this behavior just fills the void, then your engagement drops. And if no one's engaged to begin with, then there's no one kind of owning roles to make sure that the meetings are healthy and the teams are healthy, right? So if you can look, if you really want to start changing that typical meeting cycle into something that's really much, much better, you start with having someone owning the purpose for the meeting, or really driving the team to get clear on why they're meeting and when they're meeting, and making sure that the mechanics of the gathering are there. When that happens, then the conditions now exist for people to contribute to the meeting. You're creating this clarity on why we're here, so people have permission to talk about a topic and become more engaged. And that synergy is going to lead to the engagement that boosts. And then you're just clear when you're doing the work in the meeting and people are more engaged, and you're tracking with your digital tool set the action items that are made, and there's transparency around that. Then it's just very clear when we have our next meeting. It's clear what we need to talk about. It's clear what's most pressing, and this creates a virtuous cycle that can really boost uh, team health and the overall productivity in your meetings. And I
Love
know
that.
we're like 2 minutes to go to
Yeah. And I'm
the
sorry, I'm
hard
up here
stop.
like making party confetti and everything while you're talking. So that's like that
Well, I
usually how
love
our
that.
meetings go.
That's right.
Like you impart the wisdom, and I'm like, like doodling stuff
Uh,
and
Decorate,
exercising.
keeping it fun.
So where do we go next? I mentioned we're going to focus on a deep dive into the elements, as Mark mentioned, like team balance, meeting purpose, methods that make online meetings effective and awesome. So from today, we're talking about culture to actually like more tactical approaches, but even some thoughts around meeting mindset as well. So that by the end of this series, at our third day, you'll have the knowledge and tools to address some of these immediate challenges, and then going forward, explore what we can do together. So if you have questions, we are going to spend time on the line with you guys, making sure that we go through the list and answer them. So if you have time, hang out and stay with us and we'll answer those. If not, then we really appreciate your time and we'll share the recording, of course, and the Q&A responses and the recap. But remember that if you're brand new to Mural and you want to try using it in, given the recent events or just trying to boost your team's remote work, please join us. We invite you to sign up for 90 days free rather than 30 days, and you can start working visually with your team from anywhere.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I hope you got value from this. And tomorrow we're going to be getting into specific methods that you can use based on the discussion you need to have at any given point with the team. So look forward to seeing some of you there.